Hey everyone, it's Alexander the Real Mr. Robinson, and this is my review for the X from Outer Space, which is also known in Japan as Giant Space Monster Guilala. It's been a while since I've actually reviewed a Japanese-made giant monster movie. I've done all the Godzilla movies twice, I've done the Gamera series, and a bunch of other Toho science fiction movies involving giant monsters, so I think you guys deserved another one of these reviews, and this is the next best thing I could find. This movie came out in 1967 and was released by Shochiku Company Limited, one of the other big studios in Japan. The movie follows a group of scientists who are sent to the planet Mars to try to investigate weird UFO sightings, but while they're in space, they suddenly get attacked by one of the UFOs, and when the ship returns to Earth, it returns to a bunch of spores attached to the engine, and one of those spores suddenly mutates into a giant monster, and in typical Japanese giant monster fashion, it's on a rampage and heading towards Tokyo. No surprise there. So after watching all of Toho's giant monster movies, Godzilla and everything, and the entirety of the Gamera series, I thought I'd seen it all. And with this movie here, The X from Outer Space, I had seen this monster around before. It looked incredibly goofy, but never really knew much about the movie. And then I found out that Criterion actually released this movie through their Eclipse series, which pretty much consists of DVD-only releases, depending on which category they decide to showcase. And in this case, the DVD set that this movie came in was when this studio tried to make horror movies back in the day, or science fiction movies. I don't own this movie on DVD or the set that I'm talking about, but my method of watching this movie came from the Criterion channel. And I had heard bizarre things about this movie already, and I gotta be honest right off the bat, this is boring as hell. And the reason why this movie is so bad is because this came out in 1967. The Godzilla series at this point was 8 movies in. The movie that came out that year was Son of Godzilla. So the Godzilla series has definitely left an impact in one way, shape, or form. And other studios were trying to pretty much copy the same success, but they really didn't have the budget or even the talent to pull it off. The Gamera series is the exception because it managed to find an audience with much younger kids. But again, that didn't happen until a couple movies in with Gamera vs. Gauss, which came out the same year, 1967. I haven't seen any of the other copycat Godzilla movies that came out of Japan, but the X from Outer Space really does feel like it's scraping for the bottom of the barrel when it comes to making a giant monster movie. If there was any reason at all to watch this movie, it is for the monster Guilala, because when the movie first introduces this monster, it's built up like a very intense and horrifying scene, but when Guilala actually shows up, you can't help but laugh because it's the equivalent of the giant claw popping up for the first time. Like, it is one of the most ridiculous looking monsters I've ever seen. Guilala looks like a monster that's so absurd that even Ultraman wouldn't use it, because I don't watch Ultraman, but I've seen a lot of those monster designs, and Guilala is just too ridiculous looking to be amongst the Ultraman monsters. It's hard to describe what this monster is. It's some sort of weird alien space chicken. I mean, it's got the feet, it's got a bird-like beak. It's just a bizarre monster. And outside of the design, it just doesn't have anything that special. Its main attack are just shooting fireballs, and that's it. So that's the main reason to watch the movie, but you gotta sit through 47 minutes, and I checked the time. I checked the timestamp when I was watching this movie. Guilala doesn't appear until 47 minutes in, and this movie is 1 hour and 28 minutes. That is absurd that you have to wait that long to see this ridiculous monster. And even then, all the rampaging scenes involving Guilala are very short or often intercut with something far more boring, which is a perfect segue into the human characters, which are so boring. None of these characters have any real personality or dynamic. There's no chemistry amongst them, and they're all stereotypes when you get right down to it. There's the ship's captain, who is pretty stern. There's the comic relief. There's the hot blonde. And then there's the guy who leaves such a small impression on you that you have to ask, what are you doing here? Like, what is the point of you right now? And the acting's pretty bad as well. I don't want to have to compare to any of the older Godzilla movies, but this movie has a lot in common with Invasion of the Astro-Monster, given the space setting, the finale that takes place on Earth, and it just has that overall feeling. When you watch Invasion of the Astro-Monster, there are good performances from all of your actors, and the chemistry between Akira Takarada and Nick Adams is very believable. And again, there's some personality coming out of the actors. These actors here just have no personality at all, and I kind of want to blame the director on this, because if one actor's bad, then that's the fault of the actor. But if the entire cast is bad, then that's more of a directing problem. However, I gotta point this out right now. The one person in this movie who is just atrocious, who sticks out like a sore thumb in terms of a league of bad actors, is Peggy Neal as the biologist Lisa. And outside of the fact that this is a total Denise Richards James Bond scenario, her acting is atrocious. I saw this movie in its original Japanese language, and she is dubbed in Japanese, but you can even tell that she is atrocious. And I would imagine that if she wasn't dubbed over in Japanese, she would be even worse. Because there's this weird thing where Japanese directors just can't seem to direct English actors all that well, unless you have a Nick Adams or Russ Tamblyn scenario where these are American-trained actors that just went over to Japan. Because with those two, they know how to deliver their lines without being dubbed over. You don't have to do like what you do in King Kong vs. Godzilla, where, yes, they're speaking English, but they're so terrible that you have to dub them over with better English-speaking actors. You could leave them in their native language, and they'll come across as good. With Peggy Neal here, I don't get that impression at all. I feel like if they hadn't dubbed her over, she would have been even worse, so maybe the dubbing's a blessing. And then there are just so many ridiculous moments in this movie. Some of them are unintentionally funny, like when there's a hole breached in the ship that's sucking the air out into space. The actors are trying to make you believe that they're being sucked into space, but they're just kind of wobbling back and forth as if they're drunk, and you don't get that impression at all. You don't feel like they're about to get sucked out of this hole. And one of them almost does, but it's just like he's stuck there and not getting sucked out by the force. But what about the monster stuff? I already mentioned how Guilala doesn't appear until the 47-minute mark, but surely those action scenes must be good. I mean, they are, but again, they're far too short, and the model work is pretty terrible. The models just don't seem that convincing. When you see planes flying, you can clearly see them floating around. You don't get the impression that they're actually flying. And it's clear that the special effects in this movie were not done by somebody who studied under Eiji Tsuburaya, because they would have done a fantastic job of hiding all the strings and just making those planes believable when they're flying. And there's even one point where Guilala knocks down a tower, or tries to, but Guilala just kind of knocks the tower, and then the tower just goes flying in the air. And I'm like, dude, I thought I gave the Showa Gamera series a hard time, but this is embarrassing. This is absolutely embarrassing. And then there's so many other weird moments that you have to ask yourself, was this movie played for laughs, or were they trying to make this a straightforward monster movie? For example, the ship's trajectory to Mars is anything but a straight line. There's a scene where a bunch of news stations from America, China, and India are reporting on Guilala's attack on Japan, but they're all speaking in their native language, and yet Peggy Neal is dubbed over in Japanese. Where did the name Guilala even come from? Why is the ship sometimes called the Astro Boat, and sometimes it's called the AAB Gamma, which along with Guilala, the name Astro Boat is just ridiculous. And speaking of ridiculous names, if you thought unobtainium or transformium were dumb names for a material, I present to you Gilalalanium. The thing that's apparently used to take out Guilala is called Gilalalanium, and I got nothing. Like this movie is just so bizarre, but it's also boring, which leads into the main reason why this movie just doesn't work, because it wants to be straightforward at points, but at the same time, it has some absurdly goofy moments. Is this supposed to be a comedy? Is this supposed to be a straightforward monster movie? Because you also have the actors trying to act as seriously as possible against this goofy-looking monster, which, by the way, the poster is a damn lie. Not once is Guilala in space. I don't know. This is a really tough recommendation in the sense that I don't know if I can. If you've seen all the Godzilla movies, or you've seen everything that Toho has to offer in terms of giant monster movies, then nothing is going to be better. There's nothing that's going to even top what Toho has done. And this movie is just so... it's so boring. It's never anger-inducing, so I can't tell it to burn in hell. But there's nothing that bizarre or exciting about it to make it worth even watching. So, yeah, just don't waste your money at all. The best things I could say about this movie are the unintentionally funny moments, whether it be the bad acting or Gilala's ridiculous look. I mean, there is one good thing about this movie that's legitimately well done, and that's the production design of the moon base that our main characters stay at for a while. It looks more like a lounge than anything else, but at least it's inventive. But that's all I really have to say. This movie is just not worth your time. Even if you're a big fan of Japanese giant monster movies, I can't in good conscience recommend this. And there you go, that's my review for The X from Outer Space. Gilala would eventually appear in another movie in 2008 called Monster X Strikes Back, Attack the G8 Summit, which I personally have not seen, but I've seen Brandon Tenold's review of that movie, and it looks batshit insane, but maybe that's another review for another time. Now I want to know what you guys think of The X from Outer Space. If you've seen it, what did you think? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.